How does one get started building an RPG? I don't necessarily know that I know the best way to do it, because I'm not everybody, as it turns out. I'm just me. But I can tell you what works for me, and I suspect it will work for a fair portion of those who wish to embark upon the journey of RPG creation. There are two ways that I see to get started with building a game, and it kind of depends on what your initial inspiration is. Way number one, and I think this is probably a lot more common, is that you have a concept. You have some design goals, whether you've verbalized them to yourself or not. You have an idea of what you want this game to be. You know what you want it to feel like. Maybe you know what you want it to look like, to sound like. Maybe you have a setting in mind that you want to build a game for. This sort of abstract level of, I want to build this game, now how do I do that? And that's way number one. I suspect that's probably the most common way to get started with building an RPG. The other way is kind of from the reverse side. Sometimes, as a game designer, you're thinking about game mechanics, and you're thinking like, dang, here's a really neat idea for a resolution mechanic, or for like a health system, or for whatever, like, here's a neat set of attributes. Whatever it is that you decide to experiment with or think about. And then you start to build out from there and you say, all right, what kind of game does this mechanic work for? And you can build in the opposite direction. Either way works. Either way can result in a successful, whatever that may mean to you, game design experience. I think the former is far more common, where you have this idea of like, here's this like concept of how I want the game to look and feel, what I want it to be about, and now I need to find mechanics that are going to facilitate that. There are some mistakes that you can make on the road to starting an RPG, and I think they're pretty common. Like, I think a lot of people fall into the same pits. And so in an effort to help people avoid those pits, I will enumerate them here. The things that I have seen that people do wrong. One is, first off, like I've said this 100 times, play games other than D&D. You gotta play games other than D&D. You need to have a broad expanse of experiences in order to acquire the tools and the knowledge to be able to bring your concepts to life. If all you know is D&D and its various family of games, Pathfinder, etc., then you're probably not really equipped to even know where to begin in coming up with game mechanics that fit your ideas. And as a result, people who are in that situation tend to ask incorrect questions that assume things that should not be assumed. Like they say, oh, what attributes should I have in my game? And as like a designer, I'm like, there's no possible way for us to know that. That's something you have to come up with on your own. That's something you have to know for your game. That's foundational. And certainly no one else is going to be as invested in your idea as you are, and enough to know what attributes, or even if you should have attributes, like what sort of statistical system should be in your game. So those kinds of questions, like, how many skills should I have? What attributes should I have? How many hit points is correct for a new character? These are questions that make so many assumptions that the asker does not know that they are making, because they're approaching it from, I'm going to make D&D, but not D&D. Which is really frustrating when I see that, because it's so common, and it's a dead end is really what it comes down to. Like, that line of reasoning is never going to lead anywhere productive. You have to avoid that. Another pitfall is bloat. like that's a major pitfall, especially like once you get into like the middle of your project. You say, all right, I have my game concept, I have my design goals, I know what my base mechanics are. Now let me flesh it out and make this a fully functional system. Start making subsystems that interact with each other so that this becomes a complete game that can be played. And what you end up doing sometimes, I think this is a little less universal. What you end up doing sometimes is making too many systems. You're making too much bloat, too many steps in what should be a simple process. And this is kind of one of those things that I think is a lot more difficult to avoid, especially if it's like your first handful of games. You're probably not even going to notice that you're doing it until you're so far in and you look back and you realize, wow, this system is a mess. Borderline unplayable. It is so bloated. There's 12 different steps to make an attack roll. I bring this point up specifically because Facebook recently reminded me of something I was working on 8 years ago, and it was this like matrix of numbers along the side. It was just like a note that I'd scribbled out on my break or something. It's like this matrix of numbers on the side, and like all the steps for making an attack in order, and then like a resolution algorithm at the bottom. And I don't remember exactly how it all worked, but I do remember being very proud that I could sketch this out and that this was technically a functional mechanic. It was not wieldy. It was not good. It was not useful. That system ended up going nowhere. It was too bloated for what I was trying to do with it. And that has happened to me a handful of times, like definitely more than once. I have gotten into making a system and then realized there's too much here. I'm putting way too much into this game that isn't in alignment with my core game design goals. More recently, Song and Steel, formerly known as Legends and Lore, I have quote unquote finished it. It's in open beta, open for a public playtest. You can get it on my Discord server and a number of others that I'm in. The development of that game went a lot more smoothly than any of my previous projects, specifically because I was able to keep myself on track by rechecking my design goals. Like, I'm gonna do this. Okay, well, this mechanic isn't working. Is it in alignment with my design goals? And oftentimes I would find, it's not working with the rest of the system because it's not in alignment with my goals. I can remove that, put something else much more elegant, much more integrated in its place. That happened a couple of times during the development where I would realize this is a neat idea for a mechanic, but it doesn't fit here because of what I'm trying to do. And so once I could get back into that mindset where I could really switch over to what's the reason why this mechanic is not working, it doesn't fit the goals of the rest of the game. There's a disconnect of philosophy there, really. And whenever I was able to check myself on that really helped push my progress along a lot faster. And I think the reason why I've been able to come to any kind of conclusion on it is because I was able to do that. So that's the other thing. A big mistake that new designers make is not codifying their design goals. You need design goals. You need to know what your finish line looks like. And maybe you think, I have an idea what it looks like. No, don't just have an idea. Write it down. It will help you to write it down. Even if you said it in words in your head, write it down, have it somewhere for you to reference. So that you can, whenever something is going wrong, whenever you're having difficulty, you can check your design goals and make sure that you are actually moving in that direction. Because I'll bet you a lot of the time when you're having troubles, that's why. So, now, and your design, this feels kind of obvious to me, but it's worth saying. Your design goals can change. They're not set in stone. They're, pencil on paper or, text on a computer. You do not need to always stick to the design goals if you find that some of them are no longer in alignment with what you want. But having them written down as these like laws that you are going to move forward with, or going to move towards, I guess I should say, it is extremely helpful. More so than I think I can reasonably express. So there's that. The other thing is when you are making your design goals, tell yourself what your game is. Don't tell yourself what your game isn't. I've seen a lot of people who get fed up with Dungeons and Dragons and they say, I'm going to make my own system and it's going to be not like D&D. I'm going to avoid the mistakes. It's going to be more this and less this. And what you're doing is all those are negative design goals. They're all like, I will not do this. I will not do this. I will not do this. Mistakes you're choosing not to make or saying that you're not going to make. But none of that tells you what your game is, which means there isn't a direction to move towards. There's only a direction to move away from. And so like a magnet pushing your magnet around, you're going to be a little directionless because all you can do is move away from something. You can't ever arrive at an away from this. Get what I'm saying? You have to know where you're going. It's very important to know what your game is about and not what it isn't about. I think those are the major points. So to summarize, expand your horizons, make design goals, avoid bloat, and have an idea of where you are starting, either mechanically or conceptually / philosophically, whatever it is. You need to have a starting point. If you don't have a starting point, you're just thinking, I'm going to make a game. There's nowhere to go from there. You have to have an anchor point. It's either going to be a mechanical anchor point where you are finding a theme that fits the mechanics you've chosen, or you have a theme and you need to find mechanics that fit your chosen theme. One way or the other. You can't start with neither. I can't imagine a way that would work. You have to start with one or the other. And if you're making a fantasy heartbreaker, I guess just go ahead and do it. You'll learn stuff along the way. You will. There are, I think, better ways to learn than to continually bash your head against a wall. But hey, you will learn something from bashing your head against that wall. I've done it plenty enough to know. Whew, so many years I could have saved if I could give myself advice. Yeah. Anyways, this advice right here is for starting game designers. So hopefully that helped you avoid some of the pitfalls. Hit me up on my Discord and I can offer you more specific advice if you're having difficulties.